The Callisto Protocol is a game that's been a very long time coming, and while a lot of people have been looking for this as a horror game, after playing through this on stream, I feel that a lot of reviewers, YouTubers, and even the developers themselves may have come into this game under the wrong impression. The Callisto Protocol has you playing as Jacob, a gruffy horror protagonist who is motion capped and voiced by Josh Duhamel. When his spaceship crashes after being attacked by a terrorist group, he finds himself wrongly imprisoned in the worst prison in the galaxy. And of course, by horror rules, as soon as he wakes up, everything has gone horribly wrong, a virus has mutated people into crazy monsters, and he is going to have to survive by the shiv, pipe, and more. So, from the footage that you've seen so far, this game should look very familiar to anyone who's played Dead Space, as the developers of this are made up by the team as well as the original creator of Dead Space 1, right down to our completely diegetic UI. Everything is either hologram or just shown on the character, such as your health bar right along your neck. Now, where the Callisto Protocol kind of differs in its approach to combat, and combat itself is going to take up the bulk of this video. But to start things off, you have two, or I should say three primary ways of fighting: your melee, ranged weapons, and your grip device, which is essentially your telekinetic push and pull. In melee, you are able to dodge as well as block. Blocking you'll still take damage from that, while dodging will be free. Now, here's the thing: after playing games like Sifu earlier this year, the Callisto Protocol is a lot easier. How this works is if you hold left or right, you will auto-dodge the next attack. If an enemy attacks with a consecutive swing, such as left hand and right hand, you must alternate your dodge accordingly. The dodge works on almost any attack in the game, with exception to range attacks, which you must block or just walk or run away from. Enemy deformation is a big point of this game, but these are not the same enemies as Dead Space, where the only way to kill them was to, well, literally disarm them. Here, knocking off a limb severely reduces their ability to fight you, but you can still mash on them or go for the head as often as you want. Combat is very visceral, no pun intended to the original developers being Visceral Studios, and it definitely gives you that sense of heft and weight to every swing, especially to the game's numerous fatalities that can befall Jacob, which I will not be showing here, as I'm sure YouTube doesn't want you to see those. Now, the other aspect of combat that I find very interesting is how this game approaches range and melee integration. Once you've unlocked or gotten your gun, you have the ability known as Quick Shot, as you're hitting an enemy in melee, you'll get a prompt that by pressing or aiming and then firing, the game will auto-target an enemy's weak point and allow you to do more damage as well as stagger them. This allows you to almost chain stun enemies with melee, 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 range shot, back to melee. And in a lot of encounters 1v1, you definitely have the advantage. You can also perform stealth attacks, and the aforementioned grip can help even the odds. Despite being a prison, there are a lot of spiked walls and also giant fans all over the place that you can fling enemies into for an instant kill. And it really does give you some sense of hilarity, as these spooky monsters can just be flung away at a moment's notice. You'll explore the world, or the world itself is mostly linear. In this respect, there are a few paths that kind of are off it that you can find additional resources. There is a full upgrade system that will allow you to modify your weapons, give you more damage, more ammo, that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, the Callisto Protocol is definitely a melee-focused title. And upgrading your melee or your stun baton will lead to a lot of fights being easier, especially as you get later on. The game does introduce an unusual twist. About a quarter of the way to halfway through, you'll start running into tentacle enemies, who if you do not shoot those tentacles, they will mutate and basically gain a second life, making them harder to take down. And this kind of forces you to integrate range into your melee attacks, or just make more use of the grip and just fling them off of the edge before they mutate. So as you go through the game, again, you'll be making things or going through it level by level, chapter by chapter. And all in all, the game first off looks impressive. The aesthetics are certainly on point. This is probably one of the more best looking, I guess, quote unquote grounded games I've played in a long time. But for people watching this, you know I typically play indie games and not kind of the AAA or AAA independent or whatever we're calling them. But this takes me back to the original point of the stinger. Does the Callisto Protocol succeed as a horror game, or even an action horror game? And my answer to that is no, it doesn't. And this is where things get very interesting, because I've been looking at a lot of polarizing comments about this game online, and I want to share my thoughts on how a lot of people, even the developers, got it wrong about what the Callisto Protocol is. And with that lovely stinger, let's take a quick break and we'll explain more about that when I get back. And if you're interested in my thoughts on design, then be sure to check out my game design books. For entry-level students, we have 20 Essential Games to Study, and then the Game Design Deep Dive series that takes an extensive look at different genres, with more coming soon. I'm going to be just using B-roll of some footage of the second half, back half of the game as I kind of ramble on about this next point. As I said before we had our little break, the Callisto Protocol was pitched as a survival horror game. A lot of survival horror fans, YouTubers, and reviewers jumped on it, and they gave it a lot of negative reviews. There's a lot of just downvotes and low scores of this game all around. But having played through most of the game at this point, I've come to the conclusion that a lot of people, including the designers themselves, went into this game the wrong way. At the end of the day, the Callisto Protocol is not a survival horror game. It's not even an action horror game. It's, well, just an action game. And it does sound a little bit weird when we say it like that, but as we got to the point where I got the suit upgrade, we now have actually more ammo and health that I know what to do with, it dawned on me that this is kind of the third-person shooter equivalent of Fear. That, yes, it is a spooky situation and you're fighting spooky monsters and things are supposed to be scary, but you are oftentimes the most powerful character on the field. And at the end of the day, the Callisto Protocol is an action game in a horror setting, as opposed to being a horror game itself. And if you go into this expecting a horror game, you are going to be disappointed as you get further in. Combat remains 100% the focal point of this game. There are no puzzles, nothing, not even box moving related things, other than just to get to an item or find a secret. Instead, this game is all about combat. And as you get further in, the only thing that gets really introduced are, well, more ways of killing and more enemy types or just slight variations to deal with. But again, the focal of this design is on action. As I said in the last part, upgrading your melee really helps, to the point that will allow you to get free arm or limb removals, set up enemies for stronger attacks, and then it's just a 1-2 punch with your gun in order to deal with their tentacle or, again, fling them. And again, I am not joking about how effective the grip is. If there is any section where there is either a pit, a spike wall, or a giant fan or industrial machine going around, that's your answer to killing an entire room of enemies. And even some of the arena fights that people said were going to be hard when there's 4 or 5 enemies trying to attack you, all I did was pick and fling, and that was it. The game tries to slow itself down, again, tries to earn that survival horror badge about maybe 70% done when you get to an all stealth section, with enemies who will only detect you via sound or if you bump into them. And this was honestly the easiest part of the game for me, as I did my action stealth sneak around and just backstab them all to death. And even then, I was just like kind of dancing or dance crawling around them. And when I say that I had too much ammo and health, I was not kidding. This is the only game I've played where I had to literally sell health items because I wasn't using them and I needed the space to buy more or get more upgrade items to then take to the shop to then upgrade my weapons and my killing ability further. And this is where the Callisto Protocol feels like it's caught between two masters. That it wants to be a survival horror game. You're fighting against scary monsters, it's dark, there's jump scares, limited ammo. Then on the other side is an action game where you are ripping and tearing through groups of enemies. And that feels like the way you're supposed to play this game. That you're not supposed to be passive. A lot of my early deaths came from trying to be too apprehensive about running into enemies or going in using all my options. As soon as I started making use of bombs and throwing and going for quick shots and so on, combat became a breeze. And I don't understand how so many people had issues with the dodge mechanic. And I do wonder if playing this on keyboard, where I just press AD, as opposed to dealing with kind of the more finer details of an analog stick, were part of the issue there. But again, it just did not have any real issues in that respect. Now, I do wish the level design did offer at least multiple routes, or there was at least something else to do besides combat. The environments are amazing in this game. And yes, while this game is super highly gory detailed, it still has a lot of really great details to it, especially with the motion capture and character models. But again, this takes me back to the point. This is not a horror game. And no matter what the designers tell you, no matter what other reviewers will say, or even what it says on the store page, it feels, again, closer to, say, a Fear or Doom 2016 than it does even to the original Dead Spaces. And again, I really enjoyed this one, and I'm still not sure where I'm going to place it on my list, because it is definitely not horror, and it's not really, all action-paced as well. It's a very weird game in terms of its genre qualifiers. So to wrap things up, the Callisto Protocol is a game that, if you're looking for any kind of horror gameplay, I would not recommend this game. There are a lot of really solid horror games that are legitimately scary and spooky that came out at the end of 2022 that you can certainly dive into. If you're looking for an action game, something that you can just really kind of like almost play with your enemies as you bash, flick, shoot, and just do anything else you want, I would check this one out. And I really don't know how things are going to shake out if they decide to create a sequel. Will they embrace more of the action design and maybe push us more towards a Fear or Doom? Or will they dial it back, make it harder to fight, and to make it more like a Dead Space or older survival horror or action horror games? I really don't know. But again, this is one of those games that if you know or if you have the right expectations going into it, I think you're going to enjoy it. Now, I can imagine speedrunners and people looking for very high efficiency plays could get a kick out of this game. And as I'm reviewing this at the end of 2022, they have announced there will be a season pass with an additional hard mode, new game plus, and perhaps even I believe, a post-game kind of DLC. And I'm going to be really curious to see what they do with that in terms of where the difficulty is going to go. So I would like to thank the developers for giving me a press key to check this one out. This has certainly been a doozy of a review to go through. If you enjoyed things, be sure to do the liking, subscribing, and commenting. Let me tell you your game for a future piece. Please get in touch and check out our Discord and Patreon link down below, and come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where you study the art and science of games.